Hi, welcome to Infinite Leaders Live, the podcast that shares real life lessons from real life people. We're incredibly fortunate, as ever, to speak to so many inspirational people from around the world. And we're delighted you've chosen to join us today, tonight, this morning, whenever you're listening to listen, learn, and share. As usual, I'm joined by my pal in the desert, Alan, managing to dodge some camels.
Thanks, Lewis. And we're proud again to wear our Tsunami products. Tsunami is the number one choice for eco sportswear. And I'm really excited by today's guest. And we're looking forward to talking about things you don't get taught at university or on any courses.
Guys, as ever, if you listen to our podcast, we're really, really keen on your opinions and your feedback. Please do press subscribe. Please do review. Please leave us a like and all those other bits and bobs on our social media. We're on YouTube, IGTV. Follow us on Twitter, and you can find us at theinfinitelearners.com. Be better humans, be better educators. Let's go, Alan.
Yeah, get your pens and paper ready, guys. There's going to be some absolute gems of wisdom coming out of the show today. Alistair McCaw is recognised as one of the world's leading figures in maximising human performance, team culture and leadership. For over 25 years, he's worked with numerous Olympians, Paralympians, world champion athletes, Grand Slam champions, Fortune 500 companies and NCAA colleges. He's an author of 4 best-selling books and a keynote speaker. Alistair consults to leaders, coaches, teams, and organisations. He's also a 29 times marathon finisher and former 5-time world championship competitor in the sport of duathlon. Alistair resides in Delray Beach, Florida. So, Alistair, welcome to the show. And Belfast born, South Africa raised, and now Florida based. Tell us a bit about that journey, Alistair.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lewis and Alan. It's great to be here. Where do I start? Actually, born in the Shankill in Belfast, which is, that's where it all started. Left there when I was 6. We immigrated to South Africa. Was educated there in Johannesburg. And then from the age of 18, 19, obviously got into professional sports. And that took me around the world, lived in some amazing countries, had a lot of great experiences, not always easy, but, experienced Italy, France, Germany, was racing with teams there. Spent a bit of time in the Netherlands, probably around about 4 or 5 years, and then moved to the States in 2008. So yeah, a bit of an adventure.
Fantastic. Tell us a little bit about what you learned on that journey that's got you to where you are now, Alistair.
Oh, good gracious. I think that's where my grit and resilience was born, to be honest. Something that's helped me later on in life. Yesterday I was on a webinar with 120 coaches, and there was a question, obviously, how do you give your athletes grit and resilience? And you can't give your athletes grit and resilience. That's something that, is, I think, maybe misunderstood in a way. As parents, you can provide an environment for your kids to learn grit and resilience, as in not always stepping in to help them or, guiding them on how to deal with adversity and challenges and so forth. So yes, we can help in that way, but, we can't give grit and resilience. Grit and resilience is what you experience through your journeys and your hardship. And, when I had $22 in the bank and having to make it through the month, you're definitely racing with a different mindset on the weekend. You're racing to put food on the table. And it was like that for me, especially back in the 90s. It wasn't easy. There was, there was no internet. It wasn't just so easy just to go on there and find something. You'd be looking through newspapers and yellow pages. I'd be sleeping in people's garages, just trying to make a living in the sport. And back then I was so fueled by the passion of the sport, because it's not a sport that makes a lot of money, that it really did teach me grit and resilience while I was going along in the journey. And that's helped me later on. It wasn't easy. When I think back about some of the things that I had to do and travel and hitchhike with a bicycle, not many people want to pick up a guy standing on the side of the highway with a bicycle. I would do that a lot of the times in France and Germany and so on. But back then I didn't think of it that way. Like, oh, life is tough. Oh, this is it. It was what it was. I had a race to go to on that weekend, and I had to be there. That's it, because I had to make some prize money to pay for the next, for the next meal and the next entry for the next race. It was like that. So very, very grateful for those journeys. I see these days, not everybody has it this way, but, kids, staying in nice 4-star, 5-star hotels, and they think that's normal. They think that's just how it is. No, it's not. I mean, I doubt I stayed in anything more than a motel or a 2-star when I was competing and racing and so on. So, but I didn't know it back then. I was just like so grateful to be out there racing. So, that's definitely what it taught me from my journey there. Going back to my school days, very, very lucky. I was brought up in South Africa, which, is very similar to Australia in terms of climate and mentality, play a lot of sports. If you have a look at Australians and South Africans, especially, they've all played at least 4 or 5 sports, because that's how it was in school there. And I'm super, super grateful. And I wish more schools around the world would do this, is, integrate more time for sports in the curriculum, because that's where your social skills are taught more. That's where character is revealed, I believe, in learning how to win and lose. So I was very, very lucky to play a lot of sports back in school. So that's more or less how it started for me. And it's definitely helped me later on in my career.
There's loads of places we could go from there in terms of departure points from that conversation, Alistair. And I love the idea of multi-sports, 4 or 5 sports that you play, the social skills and the character. And we're going to move on to all them as we go through the podcast. But first of all, the yellow pages. I haven't heard that phrase for ages, and it took me back. And I'd love you to tell us some of those things. You said you've done all sorts, and the things you had to do. Tell us a few of the stories of the things that you had to do to keep up with the racing circuit, to get food on the table, to keep going with what you were doing and stay passionate.
I was just so desperate to my dream was to be a professional athlete. I first wanted to be a professional tennis player. So I was, from the age of 9, 10, hitting against the wall at my local club. We couldn't afford membership fees. So I would sneak under the fence. I would find old tennis balls that were found in the field next to the courts. Even at the age of 9 or 10, I was sitting alongside tennis courts where coaches were working with players, and I would listen to what they were telling their players because, like I said, we couldn't afford coaching. And I would steal information on how you hit a forehand or how you hit a serve. And then I'd go down to another tennis court and practice those things with an old box of balls that your dog would probably even refuse. And again, back then, you're not thinking of this is unfair, or you're just doing it. It was the passion. Never was pushed by my parents. They would just let me do my own thing. I would be hitting on the wall before school, after school, until nighttime, and then I'd go home. So that's where nobody told me to do that. When I think back about it, where I think 19-year-old who sits listening to other coaches and then goes and steals that information and goes and works in it, for example. So already that mentality was there, very self-driven, very self-motivated. I really put that down to nobody pushed me. It was intrinsic. It was my journey. So I'm really grateful my parents provided that for me. Partly because they were both working from 7 a.m. in the morning until 6 in the evening. So they couldn't be sitting alongside the tennis court or whatever. Anyway, I got to a good level in tennis. Couldn't afford it anymore because of, I was getting better. I was closing in the top 10 in my age group in the country. It became strings and rackets, tennis shoes, coaching, couldn't afford it. Frustrated one day with my racket sitting in the cupboard with no strings and holes in my tennis shoes. I decided, you know what, let's take up running because it doesn't cost anything. Of course, back in school, there was a track team, and one of the teachers who was one of the coaches, Caroline Foster, became and is still to this day my greatest mentor together with my mom, who, the personalities were very tough. Very disciplined, but fair. You would understand why you would be in trouble and, the lessons that were learned there. So my love for running started. Under 16s, I was a South African 5-kilometer road champion. Back then I was running times of 15:20 for 5Ks, which when I think back to it, it was like, oh, that's ridiculous. I wish I could break 20 at the moment.
Alan's struggling to break 30 minutes, Alistair, so you don't feel too bad.
I'm getting there. Yeah. Then from there, it progressed into, I think I had a slight injury, and I decided just to ride my bicycle just to stay fit while I couldn't run. And I thought, hey, I like this riding thing, because I'd start racing people on the road that were on their racing bikes and stuff. And I was on this like, you know, old bike with big wheels and so on. And I thought, hey, I'm not bad at this either. Why don't we take up triathlon? And that led into duathlon, because I wasn't a great swimmer, and made the South African national team, competed in the World Junior Championships. Two of them, was the national champion, and went on to professional sports. So from there, so that's a little bit of the journey there.
So there was something inside you that really wanted to drive on, wasn't it? I can draw a few parallels with exactly what you've just said, especially with tennis. So when I was a similar age to you, 9, 10 years old, I used to play tennis. And I remember it being weird for a guy from where I was from to play tennis at the posh tennis club that was about 7 miles away from my house. I never sneaked under the fence, I'll be honest, but I was never allowed a membership. That was never an option. It was always, you pay by the session, and once you fall out with tennis, then we'll just get you out of there. And it was a case of not being able to afford it, exactly like you just described. When your tennis strings went, it was being really worried about going home, because that was an expense that your parents really didn't need at that time. I went on to play different sports at nowhere near the successful level you did. But I think there's a real message there in terms of, you were obviously clearly driven, you were passionate, you wanted to succeed. So why was it that you just dropped tennis and thought, you know what, I'm going to run? Or I'll drop running and, you know what, I'm going to go triathlon. You know what, triathlon's a little bit too much. I'll go from 3 of those to 2 of those. What was it that got you to that point where you're like, I'm just not going to give up here. I'm going to keep going?
Yeah, it was having that vision. And I talk about this in my book, Champion Minded, is that I had that vision from a very young age. I wanted to be a champion. I wanted to stand on top of a podium one day, be it Olympics or World Championships or Wimbledon or whatever it may be. So I already had that vision and a burning desire that never left me. I loved sports. Little did I know it would become my career as well. And I think at around the age of 13, 14, I realized the bigger picture. I wasn't mature by any means, but I think a little bit more mature to understand that, okay, this is not going to go anywhere because of the financial constraints and so on. And I got to understand my parents' point of view. You know, when you're a kid of 11, you don't understand about finance and difficulty and hardship. You know, you're still very oblivious to that. I think at that age, 13, 14, I realized, you know, yeah, I'm not going to get the coaching I need. I'm not going to be able to travel to tournaments across the country because we just couldn't simply afford it. I could see the strain it was putting on my parents. And of course, taking up running, which was already for free at school, was the right option to go. And I was good at it. So, you know, when you're good at something, you feel pretty good about yourself. It helps with your self-image. That's why sports is so important, you know, when you're a kid, because it helps with your self-image and your self-confidence. I believe that's where your self-confidence comes from, is how you see yourself. And you know, when I speak to clients today, not just sports clients, but mentees and so on, I have an exercise for them that when they get up in the morning and they look in the mirror, they're saying something like, I'm ready to rock this day, or you know, wow, look at you. You know, something like that, which might feel a little bit cringy or uncomfortable at first, but you know, that's where self-confidence all starts, is how you see yourself and what you say to yourself. It's just so easy for us to look in the mirror and look for the things we don't like, our nose, our ears, whatever, another wrinkle, whatever it may be. So I try and change the mindset of people from the very first moment they wake up and how they see themselves. And I know I'm going off the subject a little bit there, but getting back, I would say I have sports to thank for the self-discipline and the self-image it gave me. And don't get me wrong there. I'm not saying that it's always been easy. Of course, we go through, you know, days where we maybe don't like ourselves as much. That's normal. But definitely that foundation has helped.
You've gone straight into an area that I really wanted to talk about, though, despite going slightly off, like you've mentioned, and that's self-compassion and the idea of positive self-talk versus, you know, being your best friend inside your head versus being your worst enemies. Now, you know, Alan and I here are in a really, really privileged position to speak to you as a person who's worked with teams and high-performing cultures across the world. Can you tell us what the common threads are that you've noticed around self-compassion and high performance?
Yeah, high performers are usually very, very difficult on themselves. They're very tough on themselves. They drive high standards. They are perfectionists or near perfectionists. So there you have it straight away, is that, you know, good is never good enough. And it's part of the reason, a massive part of the reason why they've become very successful. However, they lack the fulfillment in achievement and the process, for example. So that's something I try and help them with as well, because I was in that position where good is never good enough. That's why they become elite performers, or the 0.1% of the world who can do something extraordinarily well. And so when I work with a high performer, an elite performer, I know what I'm already dealing with. Their foundation is driving high standards. I've never worked with a successful person, athlete, businessman, businesswoman who hasn't driven high standards, or they've never been easy to get along with or easy to work with, if I can put it that way. It's because they drive high standards and they're stubborn people. And there's nothing wrong with that. You have to be in that type of mindset. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a nasty or horrible person. You can still be a very nice person and have those traits. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the things that I've seen in high performers. Obviously, if you go into teams, then, you know, that's a different story with regards to talking culture. But, you know, like one of my favorite sayings is, you know, Clive Woodward talks about a great team comprises of great individuals. And so there is I in team, if you want to put it that way. You know, it comprises of, there has to be elite individuals to make an elite team.
Yeah.
And, you know, all those elite individuals or high performers have the traits of perfectionism or near perfectionism. They're not easy people to work with. I understand that. You know, for example, I've got a tennis player that I worked with for 4 years, Kevin Anderson. He reached the top 5 in the world 2 years ago. I worked with him between 2014 and 2018, and he beat Roger Federer in Wimbledon, coming back from 2 sets to love down, which is no easy feat against the best player on grass, I believe, ever. He reached 2 finals against Novak and Rafa Nadal at Wimbledon and US Open. So a very, very high performer, super nice guy, respectful, polite, just a super guy. And people would always say to me, oh, it must be so great working with Kevin. And yes, it was. However, not an easy guy to work with, because he drove high standards, because he would ask a lot of questions. He would cross-question you. His memory was incredible. He would remember last week's session, a session 2 months ago. You know, why did we only do 15 reps there and now we're doing 12 now? So he would remember all these numbers and things, and you needed to know your stuff. That made me a better coach, because you had to back up why you were doing something. So that made me a better coach, and that made me have a relook at my philosophy and my beliefs in coaching. One of them was, everything has to have a purpose. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Because he would question me on that. So he made me a better coach. He made me understand high performers better. He's one of the nicest guys, most respectful guys, but not easy to work with. So people have that misconception of, oh, he's a nice guy or she's a nice girl, they must be easy to work with. No, behind that, you see that they drive very, very high standards.
Do you think that's an absolute necessity for a high performer? Because that comes at a cost, doesn't it? To be a near perfectionist, it comes at a huge cost. Can you talk to that a little bit and tell us what that cost is, and whether it's worth it for these high performers, and why they do feel that it is?
Yeah, I think that seed is already developed at a very, very young age. You know, I had that type of mentality of, if you're doing a 2-hour ride, I'm going to do a 2.5-hour ride. It was just the way I was. You were never going to outwork me. You were never going to outtrain me. And that's something I learned at a very young age, was being able to beat more talented or skilled players or athletes because of that mentality of I'll outwork you, I'll not give up. And that's where really Champion Minded, the book, was born from, was that mentality of if you bring these, let's just say, untalented traits or attributes to the table, you will do well, you will be successful, so that's really where it helped me. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think from what you've just mentioned there, you're talking about basically hard work, graft, really putting the work in and being the hardest worker in the room, doing a little bit more. Where does that fit in with the sort of new idea of working more efficiently, and not necessarily being the hardest worker, but working in a way that will give you an advantage?
Yeah, well, look, obviously I was self-coached at a very young age, so you don't know where the limit is. I mean, pushing hours and so on, and then obviously overtraining and so on and so forth. You get a little bit more smarter with that later. Obviously today we have the luxury of sports scientists and so much information available to us that we can just go onto YouTube or subscribe to a certain expert in their field, and we can learn all this stuff much quicker than we did back in the day, so to say. So that's really what it comes down to is for me, it was just learning my body, learning through mistakes, learning through things that would teach me a lesson. Okay, don't do that again. So for example, one race I was leading, I think it was South African junior nationals, or maybe it was seniors, I can't remember. And my breakfast was a large bowl of oats, porridge, which I used to enjoy. But, an hour into the race, I just started to get dizzy on the bike. I went off the road. I just felt no energy. And later, within 30 minutes, I was in the back of an ambulance. I was on a drip. I completely dehydrated, because I later learned that porridge or oats solidifies in your stomach and becomes like a tennis ball. And it's one of the most difficult foods to digest and to break down, because if you just look at a bowl of, and here's a lesson in nutrition, if you look at a bowl of oatmeal or porridge, if you leave it for 5 minutes, what does it look like? It hardens up, right? So that was in my stomach, and my body just couldn't break it down quick enough when I was competing. I was drinking, but you need, a liter or 2 liters of fluid to break down that. And so I learned a tough lesson there, of don't do that again. Don't have that for breakfast before you compete again, for example. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with oatmeal and porridge, but if you're racing in 35 degrees and you're doing an endurance event, maybe it's not a good idea. So those are examples of lessons I learned the hard way. And I find today that too many hard lessons are taught. Yes, learn from other people that have made mistakes, but I think all those mistakes have helped me along my journey, if I can put it that way, that I've experienced it. I've also experienced the psychological hurt from it as well, of your nationals, your big race only comes around once a year. You've worked the whole year for that, you've peaked for that. You're leading the race. It's all happening as you envisioned it in your mind for months before. And it all just comes to an end over a stupid decision of what you had for breakfast. So these are the small little things that I teach athletes today that are not necessarily, so obvious, of those mistakes that I've made. So yes, I believe a great teacher has also a lot of experience in real life lessons.
Yeah, I like that. That's the real life lessons is one of our taglines there, Alistair. Thank you. I just want to touch upon here your book about becoming a great team player and the positive impact on that. So we've talked a little about individuality there, and Lewis touched upon how you have special individuals, and how Clive Woodward, to a certain extent, when they won the World Cup, had to weed out certain individuals that were a negative influence in that squad. And they were obviously super talented people, but they didn't fit in to the dynamics. So how important, Alistair, in any organization is to get the team right in terms of personalities, talents, grafters, visionaries. Give us a bit of an insight into that.
I think the most important place you can start is that you've got to know what you want your culture to look like before you get the people that fit that culture. So you've got to have a good idea of what your culture looks like, right? How communication is delayed, how behaviors are, the values, which is very important. You know, one of the things I always advise recruiters, businesses, corporates, whatever, coaches even, is instead of hiring on skill and experience and knowledge and who you've worked with and so on, yes, that helps. It's very nice, but do their values align with yours? Because that's usually where the issues go wrong. So for example, I like to compare it to a relationship. You know, looking for a wife or looking for a girlfriend, for example, is, you know, it's all nice with regards to what you look for. Obviously they're attracted to you. They enjoy some of the same things you do, for example, but do their values align with you? Because those are the deeper situations. Same in a working business situation, or a coach with a player, or, you know, things like that. So that's very important, is that your values align. You know what your culture looks, you know what you want your culture to look like. Then you're able to find the right people that fit that culture. You know, so those are very important things. Also, don't find the best people, find the right people. So there might be people in your, you know, your list of resumes who have incredible achievements. They've got a lot of experience. They've maybe gone to a good college, all that. For me, that doesn't mean very much. For me, I want to know the person you are. I want to know where you're going, and I want to know what matters to you. I want to know what your values are, and I want to know if those align with me, because if those align with me, then I think we've got a good chance of succeeding.
Yeah, I fully agree, Alistair. We had a professional footballer on last week called Bob Buck, who was a bit of a journeyman footballer, not particularly talented by his own admission, real grafter. And he played in a Sheffield United team that grew up with Dave Bassett and the Crazy Gang Origins, and they went up through the leagues, not through talent.
Dave Bassett ended up at Wimbledon, no?
Yeah, Dave Bassett was the original Crazy Gang Wimbledon manager, yeah, and then he moved up to Sheffield United and did the same thing, took them through the leagues. And it was based around team spirit. No superstars, no egos. Is that an important aspect of building a team?
Absolutely. However, you do need an element of ego, and that's another subject we could go into. You know, people see ego as, let's just say, the enemy. You know, the book of Ryan Holiday, which is a good book. However, ego is very much attached to self-confidence. If you didn't feel confident about yourself, then your ego is probably very low as well. So, you know, ego is something we have to tame. Ego is something we have to control. Ego is about, you know, a great confidence is about humility. But it's not easy. So, you know, high-performing athletes are very confident people, and they also have a massive ego as well. So, you know, is this something you want to teach younger people? Not necessarily, but you've got to explain to them what true confidence looks like. You know, that confidence is not, for me, I describe it as confidence is an inside out job, not an outside in job. What I mean by that is that true self-confidence is that, you know, within yourself, you have the abilities, you believe in yourself, you have humility, you don't need to be showing it on the outside. In fact, I always remember an interview I watched, I think it was with a UFC fighter or MMA. And I love listening to interviews of athletes. I can't remember his name, but I always remember him saying, so what was interesting was he was a very ordinary looking guy. He wasn't built like you'd expect a fighter to look like. He had no tattoos. He had no funky hairstyles, all this stuff. He just looked like a guy you'd be in the office with, or, you know, teach alongside, for example. But this guy was a killer in the ring. And, you know, they asked him, you know, why don't you have tattoos, and why don't you look like an MMA fighter? And he said, I don't need to show on the outside how I feel on the inside. He said, I have this true inner self-confidence and belief in myself. He said, when I face somebody who looks or trying to look scary, frightening, they've got tattoos all over their face and whatever, and I'm not judging anybody here, but they look intimidating. He says, I know that inside they're not as confident as they look on the outside, and that gives me an advantage. It was just a very, very interesting interview. I just listening to this person's view on that. And confidence is an inside thing. I think as coaches and teachers, we need to teach healthy self-image to kids and what that looks like. It's one thing talking about it. We say, be humble and be kind and, have a good body language. We need to show them what that looks like. What are those examples of what that looks like?
Alistair, have you ever come across, you talked about ego there really well, and I do want to come back to self-image. I want to link that to self-compassion and self-confidence a little bit later. But you talked really well there about ego and how, Alan and I are very much advocates within a teaching world and education, that you leave your ego at the door. There isn't really room for an ego if you're trying to put the children first. I understand in a high-performance coach with athletes, that probably looks very, very different. We've also talked a lot in the past about imposter syndrome and this idea of not really feeling comfortable in the position that you're in, or feeling like you're doubting yourself and whether you actually deserve to be there. Have you ever found a conflict between that anxiety and imposter syndrome and the sort of ego that high performers need? And tell us a little bit about that if you have.
It's a good question, because I think we all feel a bit of imposter syndrome at some stage in our lives. For example, like, who am I to be here, for example? But it's funny. I got a text from a very good friend of mine yesterday, and she said, how was your day? And I said, I did this and I did that. And for me, I didn't think about it, that. And she wrote back to me saying, it was just very kind. She said, look at you changing the world again, and look what you've achieved today, and so on and so forth. And I never like take time to think about that, for example. And then I did realize I had a moment of, hey, I did a good job today. I deserve to be here. I've worked to be here, and that's okay. That's not blowing my own trumpet or whatever. It's good to have that humility. And I sent her a message back saying, thank you for reminding me or showing it, because for me, maybe I still have a little bit of that old, good is not good enough, where you're thinking to yourself, what did I achieve today? What did I do today? But you don't realize that you did achieve quite a lot. Maybe it was two things, but, you had an impact on others, for example. So I think it's okay to experience imposter syndrome, because that keeps you humble. It keeps you grounded about yourself. A little reminder like that was nice as well. But, getting back to the ego thing as well, it's definitely an area that's very, very interesting, because you need confidence, you need a healthy self-image, and that involves some ego. So I would disagree and say that ego is not the enemy. Ego is not the problem. The problem is our perception and how we're able to control that ego. We do need ego to be confident, and we do need ego to have that self-belief.
That's interesting, that the perception of ego, because the very British mindset is that to put yourself down a little bit and to not showcase. And I know Lewis and I talked about this before the show, and how different is it dealing with different cultures? Because British people tend to have that mindset, where in America it's a bit more confident and it's a bit more show. And then there's other cultures where it's all about pride. And when you work all over the world, you sort of pick that up. Is it different as you work with different cultures, Alistair?
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. And it's a question I've had before on shows as well, is that one you've just asked with regards the difference between, let's just say, America and the UK or Europe, for example. And this is why I'm here, is because I want to surround myself with optimists and positivity. And not everybody is, don't get me wrong, but generally, you might call it falseness or whatever, you know, that's, I know because I'm British myself and I've lived in Europe, and is that they might see it as, you know, oh, they're false and so on. But you know what? I'd rather have false positivity than real negativity or, you know, raw negativity. I'd rather have false positivity. And you might say, well, that's false, but I'd rather have that environment than not have that environment. And I believe, you know, I believe in two things. I believe that the most two important decisions you can make in life are the people you surround yourself in and the environment that you create. And those are two areas that I have strongly put a lot of time and focus into in the last, let's say, 20 years of my life, of who I spend my time with and the environment that I'm in. I want the sun to be shining through my window every morning. I've made that happen. It's not been an easy journey, as simple as it might sound. I want to be around good people. It's taken years to find those good people. And that's the journey I'm on. And it's been worth every little bit, for example. But yes, to answer your question, environment is everything. And people are everything as well. So it's definitely made a massive difference in my life.
I love that idea of essentially what you're saying, if I understand rightly there, is you create your own filter for life. How you look at life is completely up to you. And what is the point of looking at it in a negative manner or looking for problems and troubles? You're still going to come across those in the same way, whether you look at them positively or negatively. But how, you know, that sounds really easy to say, doesn't it? And I think we all would like to be that person. But how do you do that? How do you start making those steps towards being a person that surrounds themselves with positivity, positive people, and looks at themselves in a way that says, yeah, you know what, I'm going to approach problems, I'm going to approach roadblocks, but that's all right because I'm going to be positive about them and I'm going to push on anyway?
I think it's one of the questions I ask a lot of my clients or mentees, is the simple question of what do you want? And it's a question that a lot of people have trouble answering because they don't really know what they want. So when I was able to define what I want in my life, it was very easy to take pen and paper and write down what do I want and what do I not want. And that's already a starting point right there. Also, an important question I ask myself and I ask those I work with is, how do you define success in your life and how do you define success in your career? Because those are two of the things that are going to take the most time in your life. You know, you're going to spend more than 40% of your life working. And obviously life obviously is life. So if you define what you want and you define what success means to you, it's a lot easier to know where you're going, and it's a lot easier to know what you need along that journey. What are the type of people I want to be around? What's the environment I want to be in? What does success look like to me? When I was able to answer those three simple questions, it gave me a lot of clarity.
How did you start that process, Alistair? How did you start understanding what the answer to those questions were?
I would say I would have had more clarity about that not very long ago, probably 6-7 years ago, to be honest, where, you know, I got to a point of like, you know, is this what I want? Where do I want to go? You know, etc. Because I transitioned into a different career, so to say. I was a performance coach, trainer, worked, you know, on the physical side and the performance side of Olympians and world champion athletes, and then transitioned into obviously culture, leadership, mindset, being an author. So, you know, I had to transition. I had to relearn a lot of things as well. So yeah, I would say it was then when I just had a good look at my life. What do I want moving forward? How do I define success? And yeah, that's where it changed for me.
Can you tell us, Alistair, a little bit about those 3 daily exercises so you can think, act, prepare, and compete like a champion?
Act is obviously coming down to our behaviors on a daily basis. Our behaviors determine our results and outcomes. If you behave poorly, you're going to get poor outcomes. that doesn't just mean on the sports field or in the classroom, but in relationships. If you behave poorly, they're going to, you know, there's going to be consequences. There're going to be, you know, outcomes, poor outcomes. That's the first one. Prepare was the second one.
Yeah, the prepare. Yeah, the think, act, prepare, and compete like a champion every day.
Okay, no, there's eight principles to the champion minded, but we'll do those ones. Think is obviously your mindset. Each day we wake up, we have a choice of how our attitude is going to be. You know, attitude is the same as mindset. When you're faced with problems, what is your mindset? Is it working on solutions, or is it hanging around the problem and complaining, blaming, pointing fingers, or life isn't fair? You know, the most successful people today are just simply adapting quicker to the situation. And there's no better example than what we've experienced in the past year of COVID. Is we can complain all we want about life, but how do you adapt to the situation that's been provided for? Yes, it's not easy. I haven't had some easy days either, because my life changed in a way, my career changed in a way. I'm fueled by traveling and being with people face to face, and there's nothing more I'd like to be with sitting with you guys across a table right now, because I feel energy when I'm with people. I'm very grateful that we can do this on this platform. For example, we're able to see each other. We're able to have this conversation. So, you know, 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been able to do this. So the things that we have at our disposal today, we should be very grateful for, even though it's not easy. So, you know, again, it's how we see things, mindset, gratitude. Gratitude is a massive thing with regards to that as well. Prepare obviously is another principle in champion minded. Is every day we're preparing for something, and the better we prepare, the better again result we're going to have from that. Confidence comes from preparation. The better prepared you are, the more confidence you're going to have as well. It's like writing an exam in school, or stepping onto the court or the field or the track or in the pool. Is that you feel prepared. It's going to give you an element of confidence. And then competing is something we're doing every day. We're competing to be a better person. First of all, we're competing to be a better person than we were from the day before. You know, comparison is the thief of joy. So there's no point of us comparing ourselves to anybody else, because they are not us. We are not them. We're unique in our own ways. We have our strengths, we have our flaws, and so do they. And so what's the point of comparing? So the biggest, we're competing against being a better version of ourselves from the day before. We're competing about being a better husband, a better wife, a better teammate, a better work colleague. We're competing every day against those things. So, you know, when you adopt that champion-minded mindset and attitude, it helps with those things.
Yeah, I really feel what you're saying about connection there, Alistair. You know, Alan and I are both teachers, as you know. We've been essentially out of school for the best part of 12 months. Personally, the children at the school I work at came back on Monday this week, so I've had 5 days with them. And don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely exhausted, because you forget how hard it is to be around children all day, every day. But the energy that's given me, and the joy that's given me has just been phenomenal. And it's made me really realize the reason why I do all this. So I really feel for you being in that position where you want to be traveling, you want to be around people, you want to be in, you know, rooms full of people that are positive and that you can inspire in some way. You know, I feel that, and that must be tough. But
if I can just jump in there.
Yeah.
You made a good point there. You feel tired, fatigued. It's very, very difficult to be around a lot of kids. I think teachers are the real heroes, to be honest. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on here. It's not an easy job. The responsibility of the future is in teachers' hands, because they spend obviously the first part of the years of their life with you guys and women. But I feel my most fulfilled when I'm doing something I'm passionate about and I'm tired, because I feel that that's a privilege. Is that feeling of feeling tired, of feeling fatigued, that I've given my best to something that I'm passionate about. That always gives me a good feeling, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. That feeling of being able to go to sleep in an evening, having fulfilled some kind of purpose or done something meaningful
100%.
that you're happy with, and being absolutely knackered for it. And again, sometimes that's a contradiction, but I think it goes back to what you're talking about earlier about working and putting a graft in. If you're passionate about being on a bike all day and you go to bed happy that you've given it everything on that bike, great. If it's teaching, if it's writing, if it's supporting people, if it's making money, whatever it is, if you go to bed on an evening accepting that you've put a shift in and you've done what you can, I don't think you can ask for more out of life than that. And I think you've brought in a really nice sort of link there to children. And if you don't mind, I want to go back to a few of those things that you talked about earlier. We talked about self-image, self-confidence, self-compassion. As teachers around very, very anxious, insecure, young, easily swayed individuals that children are, and that we all were once upon a time and arguably still are, what can we do to support young people around those really sensitive areas of positive self-talk, of really understanding who they are as a person, what they stand for, what their image is all about, and being able to give them the confidence to know that they'll be okay and it'll all be all right, and there'll be bumps in the road, but we're going to give you the tools you need to be able to support yourself. I know that's quite a long question and a difficult one, but is there anything you can give us that would support children on that journey?
I believe that, let's start with boys and start with males, is that I believe that the perception of what a strong, confident male looks like is very different to what maybe we were brought up to, 30 years ago or whatever. I mean, I don't know how old you guys are, but I'm just going to speak for myself. Is that boys can't cry, men can't share their feelings. We can't be vulnerable because it shows weakness. I think that's where the biggest transformation and change can happen in young men, young boys, is that of what strong really looks like, what being a man really looks like, what the image of a man should look like. I think that's where things could change for the better, and that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to admit your shortcomings. Because I was brought up in that type of mentality of, don't cry and and don't show vulnerability, because that's not what a real man should do. So I think that's definitely one area. Girls, females are better at sharing their emotions, sharing their feelings. And here's the thing, is one thing I've learned, and is that they move on quicker than males do from adversity and difficulty, is because they're able to share their feelings and share their emotions, as where we bottle them up. We don't want to show those, but it's inside of us.
What's the side effect of bottling those emotions up? Because that's exhausting, isn't it? Physiologically and psychologically as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Suppressing those emotions on a day-to-day basis is tough.
Well, number one, it's everything's about energy. The energy you have, the energy you give, the energy you share. And so first of all, it saps a lot of our energy because we're holding it up inside. So it's almost like a backpack, walking around with a backpack every day in your life. It's heavy on you. Another thing is I've just gone blank there for a second, which tends to happen with me.
We talked about
No, it was around the idea of emotions really starting to drain you psychologically and physiologically. Yeah. We've all been in those conversations, especially as teachers, whether it's with other staff or with children, where you're coaching them through an issue and you've got your own opinion, you've got your own emotions, you don't necessarily want to share those. So you're going the long way around for the benefit of the person you're speaking to. And quite often before that, it's quite exhausting because you sometimes just want to be really upfront and honest. And after that and during that is quite exhausting. And there's that feeling after a big exhale, that was exhausting, but it was the right thing for the person in front of you at that time. And all I was asking is around that, what is that? Why do we feel so exhausted psychologically and physiologically often? Because we're suppressing those emotions that we really, really want to be sharing.
Yeah, it's because we keep it to ourselves more as males, I believe. We bottle it up. And that's why I think it's very important is that you have someone in your life that you can share these feelings with. Now, it could be, your wife or your husband or someone, and sometimes it might not be, even though I'm just saying you're very happy in your partnership or very happy in your marriage, whatever it may be. But sometimes there might just be that other person, a really good friend or somebody that you can share these things with. I think that's very important in life. I think it's very important for us, again, this is where women are better, is that they will have a group to share these feelings with, to share their emotions with. So it's letting go of it. Males, we're too proud. Again, there's that ego thing. We have a lot of pride that we don't want to show our weaknesses, not even to the people that are closest to us, not even to that friend. And that's where the problem is that we don't let go of the baggage. Women do a much better job.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because that's often the sort of perception of that's gossip. And that's women gossiping. Now, what you're saying is exactly the opposite. And I completely agree with you. To be able to take what your issues are and share them in a circle that you feel comfortable with, I don't think there's anything particularly feminine or masculine about that, is there?
No, but it's definitely something that's so important. And I believe every male should have or look for. I would say that's only got better with me in the last, say, 4 or 5 years is who are those, something. I remember a conversation I had with my mother when I was about 13, 14. It was in the kitchen. I remember, I can picture the whole scene. And she said to me, Alistair, in life, you'll probably have no more than a handful of people you trust. And I didn't understand it then. I thought, oh, that's pretty shallow. That's not a lot. And to this day, that is still true. I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of people that, I can spend time with and have fun with and so on. But she's still right to this day. Yeah. And if you think about it, and our listeners and viewers as well, you probably might agree with it. If you have more than that, wow. I mean, that's pretty awesome. But I would say I have a lot of male friends, for example, but there's probably no more than 2 that I could really say, this is where I'm at right now. Yeah. But you need those. Even if you have one, you're very lucky.
You do. Wow. That really links to one of Rita Pearson's TED Talks, doesn't it? About having that one person that you trust as a child. And that's really a great
talk. Kids don't learn from people they don't like. That's a great TED Talk there.
It's super. And we had Kent Peckel on recently, the CEO at Search Institute, and he has an incredible story about building relationships and that idea of, it only takes one teacher, one adult, one person in one child's life to go out of the way to show that child they care, that then creates that relationship of being able to trust, of being able to share things, of being able to have that conversation, which then breaks down those stereotypes of what you've just talked about, of boys being confident, male, masculine, strong alphas that don't worry about what anybody else thinks or what their negative emotions are, because they'll just deal with it. And I think that's really, really powerful and worth remembering.
I think that, I think getting back, that starts in the home.
Yeah.
Is, how are those things taught? I think that's very important. The behaviors and the molding of a child really starts, and you guys would know this more than me because you've probably studied these things and spent a lot of time looking into these, is that before the age of 6, you already have a child that either is confident, not confident, extroverted, introverted, how they respond to mistakes, how they respond to failure. It's already been taught in the home, even before they get to primary or elementary school. So, they've already developed a certain type of personality. And like I said, I'm not by any means an expert in that field. You guys would probably have a lot more research and information on that than I would. But it's taught in the home, the behaviors, the values, the beliefs, the manners, the respect. already, that's starting at a young age.
Yeah, we do see it. That is something we see often, Alan. Eh?
I totally agree, and it's funny you mention it. It's only this last couple of weeks I've been doing some work on just revisiting Carol Dweck's mindset work with the children in our school, because we noticed after lockdown and they've come back into school, so many statements of "I can't do that." So we're adding that magic word, that magic 3-letter word, yet. I can't do that yet. And then there's a flip side to it as well, is that I've finished, sir. I've finished. I've done. I'm like, well, we're never done. We're never finished. We never stop learning. What can you now do to get better? So it's just framing the language. And as you quite rightly say, Alistair, it comes from home. So we spend time with them at school trying to reframe that language. And then hopefully they take it home. And it links in nicely to my last question, actually, Alistair, is how can we take the work that you do with high performance athletes and bring it down to a school level that's going to have a significant impact?
I think it's very simple. It's basically helping them become better people, regardless of what field they go into, be it sports or be it corporate or education, military, whatever it may be. It's really teaching them how to be better people.
So not better exam results, Alistair. There's nothing mentioned there about exam results, is there, or test scores?
No, and I'm definitely not one to preach on that, because the only A's I got in my report card are in my name. So
there's a few of those.
We got 3 A's. Yeah, there's 3 A's in Alistair, I think.
But that's the thing, isn't it? We think we're driven by the outcomes, that they must get this grade to get to this university. And really, what we want kids to be is better human beings that contribute to the world. Is that not right?
Absolutely. And what's the best example is ourselves, teachers, coaches, educators, leaders. Those are the examples of what these kids are seeing right now. And especially the very younger ones who are, been almost born into a COVID world. I have a very good friend who's a teacher at a school here in Delray Beach, a really good school, international school. And she's with 5-6-year-olds. And this is their world. This is what that age you start to understand. I wouldn't say understand things more, but this is their first experience in this world, in terms of, now they're at preschool, I think it is, of distancing and not being able to hug a classmate or touch. This is going to have very interesting after effects, I believe, because I'm sure you guys are experiencing. Okay, you've done a lot of homeschooling and so on at the moment, which, massive respect to all you educators out there for doing that. I mean, I wouldn't swap you for all the money in the world to do what you do. I honestly wouldn't. I mean, I have so much respect. In fact, on my Twitter, I love following education resources and teaching and so on, because I have massive respect there.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. That is really kind of you. It's interesting what you're saying. You've talked about children being better people, and I'll give a bit of a plug to the people I work with in the school that I work at. We've been talking lots over the last several months around a real vision for PE and sport. And one of the taglines that's been really popular and that's been brought up by colleagues is to be the best you, to be the best version of yourself. And I think that's really fitting. And I think what you've just said there really compounds that idea of what we're trying to do through PE and sport isn't necessarily create the best athletes and the most physically confident and competent people, but actually develop people with social and emotional and personal intelligence and awareness that can start to understand themselves better and the values that drive them, and how to understand and control and monitor and track their own well-being and who they are. And I think one of the things I've really got out of this conversation is that idea of that everybody's different and everybody will see things in a different light. But if we can start to allow people to understand themselves a little bit more, it'll give them a bit of a key to the gateway of moving through life with a little less bumps in the road.
Yeah, completely agree with you, Lewis. And that is the challenge every day. Is like, you just said, we spoke about one of the, the values of being champion minded is competing. Just compete to be a better version of yourself today than you were yesterday. I think that's a good example. Be a better person than you were yesterday. Yeah. That's the best we can do.
That's a great takeaway, Alistair. And I think we'll start the winding down process now with some of our quick questions at the end. And we like to have a bit of fun with these ones. So you've done a lot of work on leadership. Give us your 3 top leaders you'd like to go out with for a meal, dead or alive. Your top 3.
Nelson Mandela, who unfortunately passed away. Choice. Yeah. Sir Alex Ferguson. Even though I'm a massive lifelong Liverpool supporter, you can't deny what he's done, and would have loved him have managed Liverpool as well. But we've had some good managers.
Alistair, do you think he'd survive in today's world with the pampered generation? I'm not so sure. What about you?
Listen, he survived 26 years. At Manchester United and through a lot of different generations there as well. But I asked, who did I ask that question? I think I asked Phil Neville that question on my podcast. Okay. And I think if I can remember right, he also had a similar view to mine that maybe not. I think he knew when to get out. Now, don't quote me that quote that's on Phil's answer, but there was something similar there that I think he got out at the right time. Yeah. Because he probably could have managed another 3-4 years, maybe. But I think he got out at the right time. So yeah, that's a very, very good question. Maybe not, but what he did. What's very, very interesting is, and I know they're not comparable, but Nelson Mandela was in jail for 27 years. Alex was at Manchester. Said, where do you think I'm going with this? You can make your own.
That's the Liverpool fan coming out right there, Alistair. Nelson Mandela in jail for 27. Fergie had to.
It wasn't even premeditated. So there we go.
Fergie had to put up with 26 years at Man U, and I was just going to praise you on your humility as well. Anyway, you've got one left. Which one is it?
Well, listen, I get a lot of flack from fellow Liverpool supporters because on my podcast, I've had more Manchester United people on there than Liverpool. So I always get like, who are you really? And I do have a signed Manchester United shirt here in my office. So, yeah. But you know what, guys? Just I don't care what team you are. I love good culture, sport, whatever. I don't care. I mean, I'm not that supporter that hates another team. I mean, I really don't. I don't get busy with that energy. So, yeah. Third person I'd like to. That's a good question. Leader. Who's interesting at the moment is the Prime Minister of New Zealand.
Jacinda. She's great. Yes. She's really fantastic.
Yeah, she's like a forward-thinking leader that I would be really interested in picking her brain. So Jacinda, is it?
Jacinda, yeah. Jacinda Ardern, I think it is. Yeah. She's handled COVID in a really humble, but also in a quite a transformational leadership way, which is very interesting to study because there's a lot of conservatism still in that country, and she's really sort of won them over. It's brilliant to watch.
Yeah, well, here's another thing: is really think about it. They've had a massive lockdown for a long time. They've done everything properly. She's been ahead of the game.
Yeah.
And you don't hear the New Zealand public complaining that much. No. So it's always just a very interesting situation. Yeah. They've accepted it and they've got on with it and they've supported it. So yeah, there's a culture as well,
Should be a good one to get on your pod, Alistair.
That would be good, yeah.
A penultimate question, Alistair. You're an author of 4 books. We have to ask you what book you're reading at the moment and whether there's any recommendations you have, other than obviously the key work that you've done, which we will give you the opportunity to talk about in a moment. Any books that are out there that are great at the minute?
I love that question because I'm reading 2 books and they're downstairs and right now I can't even remember what they are. How good is that? Yeah, I usually read more than one book at once. You know, if I'm in the mood for this one, I'll pick up that one. Let me have a look. The one book is The Person of Influence. Be a Person of Influence, I think it is. I'm reading that book at the moment, which is pretty interesting. I think it's by Kevin Harrington. See, I had to cheat there. I had to like look downstairs. Great books I've enjoyed. Alex Ferguson, Leading. I've really enjoyed that one. What other books have I really enjoyed? Of course, Winning Friends and Influencing People has been a great book for many years. I go back to that book sometimes. All John Wooden books have been very good. I enjoy, you know, the Pyramid of Success, good old fashioned standards and values that never get old, for example. What else? Let's think about one more book that maybe a lot of us haven't heard of, you know, because we've heard of the normal ones like Legacy and all that. We all know those. I'm just looking at my bookshelf here, so I'm really cheating at the moment. Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradbury. Yep.
There's a few there that are belters. Making Friends and Influencing People in Dale Carnegie. The Coach Wooden ones. Have you read Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's Coach Wooden and I? That's a really interesting read.
I don't think I have, because I have about 5 or 6 Wooden books. You know, just scanning my bookcase here. But I don't think I've read that one. But of course, you know, he's mentioned a lot in all of those books. You know, he's part of his story. So, yeah.
So I was like you, I'd read a lot of the Coach Wooden books, and to read it from somebody else's perspective about Coach Wooden was really interesting. It's a very modest guy, I think, in many ways. And that really illuminates that. It's really interesting. He also talks about race as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar came through the difficult times that were there in the States at the time, through the Malcolm X sort of movement and things. Really, really worthwhile. Really nice perspective. Last one for you, Alistair. Infinite Leaders Live, we talk about infinite learning and trying our best to continue being better. And you've already talked about being the best version of yourself and competing with yourself to be better every day. Can you, in one sentence or in one paragraph or one short monologue, tell us what infinite learning is to you?
Infinite learning to me is waking up each morning and being thirsty to learn more. So it really comes down to being a lifelong learner.
Oh,
outstanding. Love it. Brilliant, Alistair. Thank you. Can you tell us where we can find your work? Where can we read more about you? Where can we find your books? Where can we order your books? Where can we see sections?
Sure. On social media, I'm on Twitter at Alistair McCall. I'm on Instagram, Be Champion Minded. Facebook, Alistair McCall page. All books are available on Amazon worldwide. And of course, my podcast, Champion Minded, that's also available on most platforms.
Your podcast's great. I've read parts of your books, not all of them yet. I will be doing, and I follow you on Twitter, and I love your daily sort of doses of positivity and of reminders of what makes high culture, what makes high performance. And I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation this evening or this morning for you, Alistair. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alan and Lewis. I've enjoyed it as well. And thanks for all you do.
Cheers, guys. Search Infinite Leaders Live for our conversation with Alistair and so many others. We're on to into 40 episodes, I think now, Alan, if that's right. We're on YouTube and IGTV, and we're learning as we go. Please leave feedback. Please get in touch with us. We love to hear from you, whether it's positive or whether it's some constructive criticism for us to work on. We want to get better. We practice what we preach, and we walk the talk. Please share us far and wide. Listen, learn, share. Go and see theinfinitelearners.com for more details, and we'll see you next time. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Alistair.
Thank you.